Welcome to everybody. The event today, before we get started, is scheduled for 20 to 30 minutes. I will definitely should be able to keep it within the 30-minute period. Payroll adjustment feature is used in Church Windows Payroll when a correction or adjustment is necessary to fix an employee or contractor payroll record and no money changes hands. Okay? We're going to see why that statement becomes important. Okay? We simply need to make a correction to an employee's record for tax reporting or documentation purposes, okay? But we may or may not owe them money. So the best place to look at that is to determine, and this is what I recommend a lot on these webinars, and these payroll webinars particularly as we're getting here, is to go with folks and go up to reports and export here, right here to tax reports, and draft W-2 form. This is not the official W-2 form for 2024. Those are not even available by the government yet. Atrix doesn't have them, but you may begin to look and see what the W-2s for your employees looks like now by looking at this draft form, W-2 form, all right? That's going to be the form that that's going to probably tell you best what needs, if anything, needs to be adjusted. So we're going to run it for 24. You can run it for any prior year, of course. And then we're going to run it for a couple of specific employees so I can choose who I'm going to run it for. And I'm going to uncheck all, and I'm going to choose my senior pastor, Larry, and Jimmy Hilliard. So now when I click next and I look at that, here is essentially just a draft W-2 form for them that allows me to see where things are on their W-2 form, okay, and where they are in the year, okay? So first of all, the thing we want to do for Larry, and this is, again, if we just presume now that we're maybe at year end, okay, we need to get the pastor's housing exclusion or allowance on the W-2, and it looks like we're going to need to maybe make an adjustment to Jimmy's wages or something. He was overpaid or something got reported. He had a deduction or something that was reported as taxable then when it was not. So we simply need to reduce the reported, say, federal and state wages for him in order to get these totals and reports correct. Okay, so again, you may want to print this form out in advance of your adjustment so you can then go back and have something to compare it to when you finish calculating the adjustment. So again, we're going to get, we're jumping ahead in time here, and we're presuming we're at the end of the year. We want to get Larry's housing exclusion on his W-2, and we're going to make the adjustment to reduce Jimmy's wages, reported wages. This, of course, folks, is not only going to affect the W-2 for things like wages for Jimmy in this case, but it's also going to affect maybe my 941 form as well, and it definitely will in both of these cases. So for Larry in this case, if I'm entering his housing allowance and it hasn't been reported or recorded before, I also need to make an adjustment to reduce probably his federal and state wages as well to take out the amount that I'm calculating as his housing exclusion out of those wages, okay? So I would send this to my printer in the upper left, sending that and printing that so I have something to compare to. Then I'm going to close out. Okay. An adjustment, we're going to click finish through this, folks. While typically I do most of my adjustments as a support technician for Church Windows on either with a date of January 1 or December 31st, adjustments can be posted with a date anytime you wish. There's no restriction in terms of what dates the adjustments can be posted, okay? Just want to make that clear, all right? So how we get to the payroll adjustment window, forgive me, folks, is we go up to payroll in the upper left, and we see right below that here, calculate adjustment. Let me get out my drawing tool here. Right up here, let me steer some focus, calculate adjustment, right up there, okay? Hopefully everybody can see my horribly drawn yellow arrow there, okay? So let's get rid of that. Then when we calculate, click on Calculate Adjustment. This is the only place you can access this, folks. It's not available here in the center under no other options, but right here under Payroll and Calculate Adjustment. It pops up and it opens up, and the very first thing it says is, warning, checks are not created when calculating adjustments. To create checks, select Calculate Payroll. So that goes back or harkens back to the statement I made at the very beginning, which is that as long as no money is changing hands, then the calculate adjustment feature is going to do what you want to do, okay? If you do need to print a check or reimburse the employee, there may be another, you may have to look at another way of dealing with this problem. Still doesn't mean that the adjustment isn't necessarily warranted or necessary, but you would not be able to use the adjustment feature in order to create whatever reimbursement amount or check or whatever you needed for that employee or contractor. Okay? So just be aware. This is not a way of being able to reimburse someone. You might have to reimburse them through accounting, say, okay? Or you might have to make an adjustment or have to enter something like set up a non-taxable or taxable allowance to add into a future check for them or increase their wages on a future check in payroll. There is no cut and dry answer to some of this. It really depends on what the problem is and in terms of, and to steer you to the answer to how to solve the problem, okay? So in this case, the adjustments are warranted, no money's changing hands. We're going to click OK at our warning, okay? Let me take a quick look at my write-up here that I wrote up here on this. Yeah, and again, folks, no direct deposit payroll is calculated when doing the adjustment either. That's why I looked at my notes there, is the direct deposit, no money changes hands, okay? Doesn't mean assets may not be affected or something like that. If an adjustment is entered, it's much like payroll in the sense that it is posting to the employee's file. So it can be voided as well, all right? And right up here, let me get out my drawing tool one more time, is when I go, if you calculate an adjustment and you need to get rid of it, you can void it by going right up here under payroll and void adjustment if necessary, okay? Wow, that was even worse than the first arrow. So just be aware, adjustments when calculated can also be voided, and it may be necessary. If you don't do it right the first time, you may need to void it and redo it again till you get it right. All right. So again, we've clicked OK at our warning. We're now going to enter our adjustment date. Folks, I can make this any date I want, okay? So if we're presuming, again, we're at the end of the year, we need to adjust these amounts on these two employees' W-2s. We're going to make the adjustment, say, 12/31/2024, okay? System doesn't care. It doesn't care that I'm not at December 31st yet. I just am telling it what date I want it to affect their pay records. If the adjustment is for third-party sick pay, you would check this box. But frankly, folks, I've been doing this over 20 years, and I think I've ever had somebody use that or check that box once, okay? It's unlikely this would be for an adjustment for third-party sick pay. So then once we've chosen that, check that box, we're then going to click Next. And here it is, much as we are seeing it everywhere in payroll, of course. Who are we calculating our adjustment for? Okay. So here again, we're going to specific, and we're unchecking all of our employees, checking just the two employees that we're wanting, Larry and Jimmy. Okay. Folks, you can, of course, calculate adjustments for contractors too, but that, of course, affects their 1099 form totals and your 1096, not W-2s and W-2 and W-3, okay? So we've now made our selections for our employees. So we're going to now click Next. And here we are at these screens are remarkably familiar, right, folks, because they're virtually identical to our regular payroll screens. There's a noticeable difference about this, okay? Everything that Larry has on his pay record for his pay labels, regular overtime additional, any PTO necessary, the allowances, the deductions tabs, everything's here that I would normally see on their employee file with the exception of amounts, okay? Notice, folks, under pay hours and rates, no amounts or pay rates, no hours, nothing, okay? Nothing under allowances, nothing under deductions. Why? Because the software wants me to tell it what I am adjusting. It has no idea, okay? So we're going to do that for both of these employees. So right here, Larry, there's nothing under wages. Like I said, we were just trying to get their housing allowance or exclusion on the W-2. So we're going to go right to the allowances / other tab. I'm going to click over here, and I'm going to put in, say, $5,000. Okay? That's what he's claiming as his housing allowance amount on his W-2 at the end of the year. All right? Everything with regards to Jimmy, I could come over here and I could enter that amount there as the negative value to reduce that. But I don't need to, and you're going to see here, and I wanted to show you this as part of our webinar today, okay? So we're going to go to next, and here we're at now we're at our posting selections. Again, folks, very similar to our calculating payroll screens. Post payroll, yes, no, and of course we are. Do I want to print the reports? Again, notice copy EFT file is not an option. Print checks, assign check numbers is not an option. There is no money changing hands here. We're going to go to Browse Payments here to the right, okay? So now when I click on that, I've now got Larry highlighted at the top. Notice no Social Security and Medicare. But let's say again, we've paid him the $5,000 for his housing throughout the year. So we got to get that moved into box 14. But we now also have to reduce the amount of their federal wages and their state wages by $5,000, okay? So we're going to click right here under federal gross taxable. I'm going to type in minus $5,000, okay? Down to gross taxable for state, negative $5,000. You can enter negative values here, folks, okay? If I needed to reduce local wages, I could also enter that as well. Notice it is stating, though, that the housing allowance is taxable for local wages. And if that housing allowance had not already been, it was already considered taxable, we would change this to 0. Okay? Because he's already had that money included in his pay. We're just simply moving it on the W-2 from wages over to box 14. Okay? Also taxes. If taxes are withheld, I can also post that and transfer that into accounting, but in this case, we're not going to do any of that because we're just trying to adjust their wages. Okay? Then we're going to jump down to Jimmy. We're going to go back to tax deductions again. We're going to put in, say, a negative $1,000 under his gross. I can increase it as well if I wish. Okay? So if I want, I can put it in as a positive value. Actually, let's do that. We're going to show that we've increased his wages by $1,000 for federal and state. Okay. And now notice here, it says net pay, but again, nothing is changing hands. Okay. We're just putting it into the boxes on the W-2. Click OK. Folks, down here at the bottom, and the reason why I've kind of held off on this here is right here, this option called transfer to accounting. I'd say in my experience, probably 80 to 90% of my adjustments that I post with folks do not transfer to accounting. If all they need to do is report or change their reported wages, I don't need that. If it affects taxes, I might. Okay? But it depends on what it is. But you have to be very careful about what you post when you're transferring these adjustments into accounting. You just don't know. You can go into accounting and reverse out the adjustment that you transfer, if you determine later on that you should not have transferred that. But I can also just not transfer it and then, come back in, and if I decide later I want to transfer it, I can. Okay? So here, I can check to print my reports if I wish. And I'll leave transfer to accounting. I'll show you what I would do if this was normally the case. But again, cannot create anything. So here now it's opening up and allowing me to print my reports. If I go to next and leave those, this sometimes takes us a few seconds, but I like to show it because in some of these cases, folks, notice allowances increased by 5,000, federal and state have been reduced, and Jimmy's are increased by 1,000. I might want to print this report. Okay, send it to my printer, close out. It goes now, takes a few seconds, opens up the now pay type earnings detail, shows allowances for Jimmy. Maybe want to, print that. Maybe I don't. It's up to me. It's in the data. Okay. Let's close out of it, opens up the final report. Here, our pay period deductions report. Notice here, gross less tax for Larry, it's my choice entirely. I can always go out and check those later on or print those reports later if I wish. Okay? Your choice. But you have to look at them. Depending on what you adjust, there might be zeros on everything on the report. So the report doesn't help, doesn't do any good. Check it. So then we close. It now opens up and see it wants to take my, it wants me to deduct the amount out of checking and charge it to pastor's housing allowance as though I owe him that money, and I do not owe him that money. So all I'm going to do here, folks, is just check the box, click the button, mark as do not transfer. It says, are you sure you don't want to transfer? Yes. If I need to, I can always come back down here and do the reactivate do not transfer in the bottom left, and that will then allow me to reactivate that and transfer that into accounting if I wish. Okay? All right, let me review my notes here again, folks. Okay? Yeah, and so again, I kind of wrote this up a little later in the document, folks, and all I do is just close out of this now and I go finish, and it's now, archived or hidden, as it were. I can't state this enough, that when we were at that browse payments window, folks, if you are adjusting Social Security and Medicare wages, there's the employer and employee share of that. You have to be very careful about what you're adjusting when calculating adjustments regarding Social Security and Medicare. The software is coded and designed in such a way that whenever you see there is a withheld amount for the employee, the software automatically wants to withhold for or match that for the employer's share. Okay? If it sees something is taxable for Social Security and Medicare, it's going to want to withhold for that. It's going to want to report it in wages. And you cannot affect one without the other. Okay? Hopefully, you're going to have very few, if no, issues that involve Social Security and Medicare, but if they do involve that, then it has to be dealt with very specifically, and we don't have time to go into that here today. Okay? And again, it's dealt with on a case-by-case basis. But if oftentimes it's like a minister that's had not been checked as a minister and they've had Social Security and Medicare withheld. I'm okay with that. I can adjust that to get rid of it, but I've got to fix both the employer and employee share. I'm gonna fix that so it deals with it. Whether I transfer it into accounting is a different matter. Probably not, because I'll make the adjustment in accounting there. But for things like wages and taxes and things like that, that's okay. Social Security and Medicare, different animal entirely. Call us if you have questions about that. Okay? All right, so I want to go back to the employees' W-2s here, draft copy W-2s, and look and see how those are different now, okay? So I'm going to go to next, and I do uncheck all, and I do Jimmy and Larry, and I click next, and we now see $5,000 here under box 14 for Larry. Let me get my highlighter and draw some focus right here, okay? Wasn't there before. His wages and tips under box 1 and 14 were $14,919, and they're now down to $99.19 and change. So the adjustment did exactly what I wanted it to do. When we go down to Jimmy, we now notice that his wages and tips and compensation in boxes 1 and 16 are higher. I didn't do any adjustments to Social Security and Medicare, but I could if I needed to. But again, it would withhold if I was adjusting those wages, okay? He would still allow me to transfer that in. He would not be paying for it. The church would, of course. But folks, you can adjust anything as part of the adjustment process in payroll, virtually. You can do adjustments to change or correct paid time off if necessary. You can do it for earnings, for taxes, for wages, for allowances, for deductions. You can make adjustments for any and all of that stuff, okay? Just keep in mind that just because the software wants to transfer the adjustment into accounting doesn't mean that it should, okay? So it might be easier to, again, hide the adjustment or mark it as do not transfer, and then go into accounting and make the necessary adjustment to do what you need to do to fix the books in accounting there. Payroll may not be transferring it to the appropriate accounts based on what it's for, okay? So that, folks, is where we're going to leave it for today.